No hands up. A key element in pose, pause, pounce, bounce is the idea of picking students who've not raised their hands. And this is a really important issue that is actually quite controversial in some ways. But the big idea here is this. If you are asking a class a question and you're allowing students to raise their hands and you're only asking for students with raised hands to respond, you are creating two classrooms in your classroom. In one of those classrooms are the students who are trying to answer just about every single teacher's question. Those students are actually getting smarter. The work of Neil Mercer in England showed that just engaging in that classroom dialogue makes your IQ go up. So those kids are getting smarter. And in the same classroom, within those same four walls, you've got students missing out on the chance to get smarter by staying below the radar. It's what Keith Stanovich calls an educational Matthew effect. After the passage in the Bible, to those that have, more shall be given. From those who have nothing, what little they have will be taken away. So if you are allowing students to choose whether to respond to your questions, you are making the achievement gap in your classroom bigger than it needs to be. It's as simple as that. That's simple. What you do about that is far from simple. So one of the things that we suggest is that we should use a rule of no hands up. And this doesn't mean anarchy with students shouting out. It means if the teacher is asking questions, most of the time, and I would say probably 80% of the time, most of the time, the teacher should select which students to respond. Doug Lemov calls this cold call. There is some debate about whether this should be random or not. So some people think that diffident students might actually be made even more anxious by the risk of being called on to answer. And that certainly is a problem. So some teachers who do use random questioning allow students to put their fingers on their chins to show they're still thinking about this. If that finger is still there after 20 minutes, you might want to challenge the student. But the important point is, I think some kind of randomization device is helpful because teachers, in general, we find it very difficult to do random. When time is tight, they seem to be drawn to one of the stronger students for a good, crisp answer that they can use to wrap up this particular topic and move on to something else. So some kind of randomization device is useful. You can use popsicle sticks with students' names on in a cup. You can use little cards. The thing to remember is you need to be careful about how these techniques are used. So for example, we saw some teachers not replacing the sticks, which means that as soon as a student has answered a question, they know they're off the hook for the next 25 or even 30 questions. Other teachers have tried to kind of color code their sticks for different students. So they actually choose the stick first, announce the student's name, and then make up the question, which means that, of course, all the other students are now not paying any attention because they have no need to. The pushback we get then is, well, there's no point in asking a student a question they can't answer. I agree, so don't ask that kind of question. Ask a kind of question that every single student should be able to actually address in some way, and then you can pick up on their responses by probing further if they don't actually respond in the way that you need them to respond. Now, everybody hates no hands up. Teachers hate it because it involves changing routines. Low achieving students hate it because they have to pay attention. We were surprised that the ones who hate it most of all are the highest achievers. We thought originally this might be because they couldn't show off that they knew, but that's not the reason. I often ask teachers, do you have some students who have their hands up all the time? And most teachers say yes. But I don't think you do. I think you have students who have their hands up almost all the time, but only when they're absolutely certain they're correct. And what the highest achieving students said to us when we interviewed them about things like no hands up, they said, I always seem to get picked on when I don't know the answer. Which they thought it was horrendous, but everybody else in the class thought was pretty good. So in fact, the perhaps paradoxical effect of no hands up was actually to make the class more cohesive because they saw that everybody gets things wrong. The other thing, we did some interviews with some students. One high-achieving boy, his name was William, and we This was part of a TV show we did in England a few years back called The Classroom Experiment, which you can watch on Google, on YouTube. We asked them what had they noticed, and William said something rather interesting. He said, "I never knew my classmates were so smart." When teachers allow students to choose whether to respond, the classroom conversation is dominated by the quickest students, not the ones with the most interesting or thoughtful things to say. So creating that space for everybody to have a voice actually tends to produce more cohesive, more coherent classrooms, students supporting each other as learners.